Well, welcome everyone to the Meadows Center's Blue Bag Lunch and Learn. I always have a hard time with that. I'm so happy today to get to introduce my friend and colleague, Todd Votteler. He's going to speak with us today about water markets in Texas, something he's been working on for a number of years, and I'm really eager to hear some of his thoughts. A little background on Todd. Todd is a fellow here at the Meadows Center. We're very proud to have him on our roster of fellows. He's a PhD and president of Collaborative Water Resolution LLC. He's also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Texas Water Journal, and he's the editor-in-chief of Texas Plus Water. Todd has a rich background in water, obviously, and a lot of ESA, endangered species work in the state and outside of the state. He's also had experience as a research scientist for the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in DC. He was executive director of the Guadalupe Blanco River Trust, and he was the chairman of the Texas Land Trust Council, so a very diverse background. He has a BS in natural resources from the University of the South, a master's in natural resources from the University of Michigan, and his PhD right here from Texas State University, I believe the very first one ever issued at this university. We're really proud to host Todd, and I'm going to turn it over to him now.
Okay, great. How can you hear me? Do I sound all right, Carrie?
You sound great. Yeah, I can't see you though. Got your picture up.
Sorry. Is that better?
Perfect.
May not be better because you can really see me. So let's see. Am I able to? Yeah, it looks like I'm able to share my screen. Let me just find. Let's see. This find my presentation, and we'll get started. Let's see. I think that's it. Yeah, okay. So let me go ahead and figure out how to get, okay, the full screen on there. So hopefully you can see my introductory page for my PowerPoint. And as you probably saw in the invitation, I'm going to talk about water markets, and specifically a study that's going to be coming out the next few months called Water Markets for Texas. And so I've been doing this research for Texas 2036. And so, just to make sure everybody, knows about, Texas 2036. Texas 2036 is a nonprofit organization that, if I can get this cleared, I have something on the screen here I'm trying to remove so that I can read all of my screen. I'm not sure how to do that. Let me go back. So Texas 2036 is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to coming up with long-term data-driven strategies for the future prosperity of Texas. And so in that regard, they were looking at water issues and trying to figure out, okay, there, I got my screen fixed now. What Texans are thinking about water. And so going to their polling that they had done in recent years, they asked voters in Texas, what do you think about access to water? Is that, extremely important? And they said, absolutely. Question here was, if a severe drought occurs, then Texas will not be able to meet a significant amount of its water needs, meaning some communities may not have any access to water. And so the results of their polling showed that over 60% of the folks that they polled were, very or extremely concerned about that. And, that's not really a surprise, I don't think, given what the state's gone through in some of the recent droughts, particularly the drought from 2010 to 2015. uh, additional polling question is maybe what led directly to the study I'm about to talk about. And that was a question that said, hey, Texas cannot build enough water reservoirs to meet its growing water needs, so we must rethink how water markets work and how water is priced before 10 million more people are living here over the next 14 years. And over 70% of the folks who were polled said that, yeah, we ought to think about water markets. And so that's what led to this study. And Jeremy Mazur, who's with us today, who works for Texas 2036, he handles their water and energy issues. He and I started meeting, and eventually he asked me to take a look at some of these water market issues for Texas 2036. And the three kind of key issues are, how do water markets really work? What are the potential benefits of water markets, and what's required to create new water markets? And so all that will be a major focus of this report coming out in the spring, it looks like, or beginning of the summer. And so my study included a literature review, stakeholder interviews, and research and assessment of existing water markets, and then assessment of impediments to creating new water markets. And so the deliverables are water markets for Texas report that includes case studies, the two case studies I'm going to talk about actually here in a minute, and then recommendations for creating new water markets, and then engagement with legislators and the media to get the word out about our results. And so let's just start off here when, diving deeply into water markets, with what is a water market? Well, I found a number of different definitions. And so before I even start going through those definitions, when you look through the literatures, there's a lot of kind of conflating of the terms water market and water marketing, among other terms that are used somewhat interchangeably, but are not really quite the same thing. And so we're not talking about water marketing here, going out and, trying to, find people who might be interested in buying some of your water supply, or maybe buying your water rights, but we're actually talking about water markets themselves. And so looking at, some of these other definitions of what a water market is, a water market, first one kind of describes it like a stock market for water. Instead of offering financial products like stocks and bonds, sellers in water markets can offer short and long-term leases on their water rights and even sell them outright. Another definition, a water market is an institutional structure designed to facilitate the transfer of rights and titles to ownership in water, or rights to use the water. And the third, a water market is a complex interaction of individuals and institutions, the product of a large number of people, structures, and operational mechanisms and rules. So I looked at those, and then I looked at what I really, think is a water market when you look at, the deep dives in the literature examining, how, water can be traded and result in significant improvements in terms of the conservation of water and the, uh, you know, uh, stretching of the water supply. And so I came up with this definition with actually, the help of Jeremy. A water market is an organized and regulated system that facilitates temporary and or permanent exchanges of water usage rights from any source among voluntary participants within a specific geographic region or area. And so the reason that I define water markets this way is I'm not really looking at, kind of one-off exchanges that might happen between somebody who's buying a water right or buying, a lease of water, or actually just purchasing land to get the underlying water. I'm looking at a regulated system like the system that exists for the Edwards Aquifer and like the system that exists for the middle and lower Rio Grande water market. So before we get into the two water markets in Texas, which I just mentioned, it's important to think about what kind of transactions occur in water markets because it's a surprisingly diverse set of different types of transactions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these in a minute. But water sales, that's pretty obvious. I think people think about that when they think, hey, someone's going to sell their water rights, for example. Water sale leasebacks, it's not commonly thought of, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute, what that is. Water leases, hey, you're going to lease somebody's water right and use it for a year or maybe multiple years. I think, if you look at 1 and 3, that's mostly what people think about. Option contracts. Option contracts are a little bit different. One type of option that you may be familiar with in the Edwards is an agreement to not pump water from the Edwards during certain types of, drought periods or during certain periods when spring flow is low or recharge of the Edwards Aquifer has been under a certain amount over a certain period of time. And if you're familiar with the Edwards, that's called the voluntary irrigation suspension program option, where irrigators are paid not to use their water in certain drought years. Then there are also water trades and institutional transfers. It's a little unusual type of transaction, but I'll tell you about that more in a minute. Water right donations, water right retirements, subordination agreements, groundwater banking, water banks, groundwater ranching, and internal leasing of stored water. So water sales, what is that? Okay, you got a volume of surface or groundwater, reclaimed water, conserved water, and you transfer it through a permanent agreement or contract. So water sale is really a permanent transfer. A water lease, which I'm going to go to water lease first, which is the third one here. It's the same thing essentially, except it's not a permanent transfer. This is a short-term or annual lease of any type of water supply. Now, a water sale leaseback, that's where a seller of a water right reserves the option to lease the water associated with the water right from the buyer. In other words, I'm selling you my water right, but as part of that agreement, I are going to have an option there to continue to use that water, but I'm going to lease it from you as the buyer, for a certain period of time. After that, it's your water right, but say I may need this water for another 10 years, and then I'm going to retire from farming or something, for example, and then the buyer of that water right would be able to use it for whatever purpose the water rights authorized for. Option contracts. So as I mentioned, the VISPO program or the dry year option, these are contracts and forbearance agreements for surface and groundwater that involve the payment by one party to a water right holder, essentially not to use their permitted water under certain circumstances. That's mostly what you see in option contracts. But it could be a contract, hey, to take water instead of forbear using the water under certain circumstances as a hedge. If you don't think your water supply is going to get you through, the next year, you might have a option contract to buy water from somebody under certain circumstances. Water right trades and institutional transfers. So these are a little unusual, but they involve transactions where you're trading a surface or groundwater right for somebody else's surface or groundwater right. Usually it's within the same aquifer. Occasionally, though, you see it, in other places where there are trades within a state or between the federal government and state governments for properties, and those properties have water rights associated with them. Water right donations. If anybody's familiar with the Texas Water Trust, which is a trust the state of Texas manages where surface water rights may be dedicated for the environment, that's a type of donation. And in that situation, a water right holder may donate all or a portion of their water rights towards another user or specific beneficial purpose. Texas Water Trust has been around for a long time. I think there are only three water rights in it that I think that was what we heard in the meeting recently, three or four. But one of those is a very significant water right associated with Spring Lake and San Marcos Springs for a a uh, a water right that is non-consumptive water right. Then water right retirements, you can retire a water right in exchange for somebody, paying for you to do that. Or, you could pay somebody, hey, I want you to retire part of your water right, and I'm gonna pay for the conservation technology that allows you to actually, put the remaining amount of water to an equal or greater benefit or stretch it. And so, paying for someone to install, low energy precision application LIPA, technology for irrigation is maybe an example of that. Subordination agreements. Under these agreements, a senior water right holder, surface water right holder, will subordinate their senior water right to a junior water right. In other words, the junior water right becomes senior to the senior water right. And, it sounds like an unusual thing. It is kind of unusual, but there, on the Guadalupe River, that was done by the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority with its downstream hydroelectric rights, which were subordinated to stored water rights in Canyon Reservoir. And through that process, the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority increased the yield that they could take out of Canyon Reservoir and supply there in the region by subordinating their downstream hydroelectric rights upstream to Canyon. Groundwater banking. This water market strategy involves storage of surface or groundwater within aquifers for later use. Here, the aquifer storage facility, essentially is kind of like a literal bank that stores surface groundwater, sometimes from imported sources that during wet years you can take, or you can take it out in dry years after storing it in wet years. And so groundwater banks really should not be confused with water banks, which are brokering institutions. So water banks, it's another term that's got a range of meanings. It's been described as a water market mechanism, which a public or private entity can act as an intermediary in the trading of water rights. Water banks can potentially serve as a type of water market. Water banking is described as an institutional arrangement for managing a system of deposits withdrawals that is specifically designed to facilitate water transfer among different users. So you can see with the term water banks, there are other similar terms that can create some confusion about what's actually going on there. Groundwater ranching, typically in Texas, conducted by cities where they may purchase, a large piece of land, and often that land's irrigated, or it's over a significant aquifer, and that the water associated with that piece of land is really what that city or other buyer might be interested in. Of course, this is something that was done up in the Ogallala over the years. People may remember T. Boone Pickens. He bought a very large ranch, ended up selling the water rights there in the Panhandle. I think it goes to Cremwa or maybe Amarillo, but he marketed those water rights to San Antonio and Dallas. And so he was going to build a pipeline and get that water to those major cities if he didn't have a local buyer. And so this kind of thing is also known as buy and dry. Internal leasing of stored water. So think again, kind of Canyon Reservoir is an example. There's stored water in there, which the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority, in this case, has allocated the water to different users. You know, they're paying the GBRA for that water supply, but they may not be using it right now. And so because there's a limited amount of water available, they've probably gone in and they paid for it, thinking we're going to need it in the future, but we don't need it now. And so in those situations, that stored water, which somebody's paying for but not currently using, can be the subject of short and long-term leases to other users who have immediate needs for water. And so this type of process is really controlled by the water district that, or whoever has those water rights, in this case, GBRA, but the Brazos River Authority has a significant program that does this as well. So now we get to the water markets in Texas. So there are really two true water markets, in my opinion, in Texas, or I guess I'd call them more pure water markets. The Middle and Lower Rio Grande surface water market, which was established in 71, and then the Edwards Aquifer groundwater market that was, I say, established in 96. The legislation creating the Edwards Aquifer Authority was passed in 1993, but was subject to federal and state litigation, and so the Edwards Aquifer Authority didn't really constitute itself until 1996. So both of those water markets actually resulted from litigation. And it's very interesting that the litigation in both cases was influenced by conditions encountered during the drought of record. So that's the 1950 1957 drought, which in some parts of the state began actually in the 40s. So for the Rio Grande, the case of importance is the state of Texas versus Hidalgo County Water Control and Improvement District 18. And that lawsuit was filed in 56 during the height of the drought of record, when there simply wasn't enough water available in the Rio Grande. And so in that state litigation, the state judge ended up adjudicating the water rights in the lower Rio Grande, and eventually they were adjudicated for the middle Rio Grande. And after that, the water market arose. For the Edwards Aquifer, this big case is Sierra Club versus Babbitt, which began, I think, in 89 and ended in 96. And that was a federal case, Federal Endangered Species Act case. And you think, well, you know, what's that have to do with the drought of record? A lot of the basis to that case was what happened at Comal Springs in 1956, when zero flow was recorded for about 4 months, and the fountain darters were extirpated, and maybe some other species we weren't aware of from Comal Springs. And so that's how I link those both back to that event, the drought of record. What's interesting, in addition to what I just mentioned, I think is interesting, at least the drought record connection, is that neither one of these water markets was contemplated in the judgments of these cases. There's nothing in the Hidalgo County case or in Sierra Club versus Babbitt that says, hey, we're creating a water market, or a water market needs to be created. And if you look at the legislation that created the Edwards Aquifer Authority, doesn't say anything about creating a water market in that either. So how did were those water markets created? Well, both of those cases essentially put a cap on how much water could be used from each source. And TCEQ created the rules for trading water rights after the case was finished and the water had been allocated in 71. And the Edwards Aquifer Authority created the rules for trading in the Edwards Aquifer after the Edwards Aquifer Authority was established. So here is the Middle and Rio Grande water market. You know, this is really the best map I found that kind of shows the watershed and where the reservoirs are located. And if you look at 14, number 14 is Falcon Reservoir. So Falcon and below, that is the lower Rio Grande water market. That's the lower part. The middle Rio Grande begins at Amistad, which is reservoir number 10. You can see right here, and then goes down to Falcon. And there, in these two water markets, there are trades between them. There's not that many, but there are, there's the ability for some water rights in this portion of the water market to be traded downstream and vice versa. Uh, Although that doesn't really happen too often. And uh, so what I found looking at the Rio Grande, and I have to say that we had very limited success in getting the data that we were looking for on water rights trades in the Rio Grande. We did put in, I think we made 5 different uh, public information requests to TCQ, and including contact the water master's office and something, but we never quite got the really, specific information that we were looking for on actual trades. So I had to kind of pull back and do a larger kind of look at this. And so that's going to be reflected in this chart and the next one. And so you can see that in 71, when the judge, ended that case, the Hidalgo case, the amount of water allocated to users in the lower Rio Grande is what we're looking at here, and it should say lower Rio Grande, was just right at 2 million acre feet. And so the majority of that, vast majority of that, was allocated for irrigation, and a much smaller amount was municipal and industrial uses and some other uses like mining. And so that water market was set up so that irrigation rights could be converted to municipal or industrial rights. But to do so, the irrigation right would be reduced in terms of its size by 50% or 60%. And so if you look at going forward in time, 2018, you can see that indeed is what has happened. Some irrigation rights have been converted to municipal and industrial uses, and as a result, the amount of water allocated in that water market for use has shrunk over time because those irrigation rights, took either 50 or 60% hit during that process. And so you can see that the percentage of municipal and industrial rights has increased overall during that period. And that should say, it says 71 to 2023. It should say 2018. I'll have to fix that. And so looking at the percentage, you can see so that, originally about 92% was allocated to irrigation and 8% to everything else. And today that's probably about 84%, 85% is irrigation, and 15% is non-irrigation. So non-irrigation has doubled over that period from 71 to 2018. So now let's look at the average aquifer groundwater market, and you can see here the map of the Evers Offer that many of y'all are familiar with. This was produced by Greg Eckhart. I need to put Greg's name on here. But he was very kind to share this with me. And so knowing this region out west, most of the uses of Edwards Water have been for irrigation. And then when you get to Bear County, it's mostly been used for municipal uses. And then kind of as you go to Comal and Hayes County, where Comal Springs and San Marcos Springs are located, the primary use is still, more or less municipal use. So for the Edwards, I took a look at a number of things, including the permits that were issued initially by the Edwards Aquifer Authority and how those have changed over time. And so if you look at the original allocation that came from the Edwards Aquifer Authority, a little, the largest category of permitted groundwater was for irrigation, just under 50% at 46%. Municipal permits totaled, about 236,000 acre feet, and that's 42% of what was issued by the Evers Aquifer Authority. So moving forward into time and looking at what happened by 2021 as trades were occurring within this water market, you can see this pretty significant shift where irrigation, which was about 46% of the water in terms of permits, is now about 31%. And you can see that municipal, which was about 42%, is at 61%. This is in 2021. And so obviously what's been going on there is you have seen that irrigation permits have been shifting to municipal, and industrial permits have, shrunk actually a little bit. And the reason for that primarily is that in Bear County, all industrial users really, at this point have to get their water from saws. And so, so they're getting it through the same mechanism that anybody else would get their water who's using it in San Antonio for municipal use. So that's how those permits have shifted over time. Now, what I can also tell you is I do have all the transactions, individual transactions that have occurred since that water market in the Edwards got started. And I've taken a look at them from about 20 or actually 1997, really, where there's some trading even before all the permits are issued, and then 2020, and it's about 9,000 transactions. And the pattern of how water use has changed over time is really interesting, and that will be one of the main findings in this upcoming report. So I want to take a look at this phenomenon because this is a key to water markets. So one of the things that you see in water markets is this decoupling between water demands really being based on population increases and and then water demands being less based on that over time. And so you can see that the Edwards Aquifer Authority that did this analysis took a look at the projections for water demands within their area from 70 to 2014. And you can see that right here about 1996, 1998, something starts to change for the Edwards Aquifer region. In other words, the pumping that was predicted to meet the projected demands all of a sudden is less, and that divergence gets larger over time. So this is looking 2070 to 2014 to show this period when they're really tracking each other. And then here in 1998, the EAA adopts their groundwater management plan, and the permits are being issued, and they're being issued up until about this period right here. And then the divergence gets greater over time. Well, kind of focusing in on that divergence, the EA found from 97 to 2014 that some 2.6 million acre feet of pumping that had been projected using kind of pumping is based on population increases. That pumping did not materialize. And so, uh, in my opinion, much of that is due to the impact of the water market. And of course, there's a big conservation program going on at the same time in the Evers-Offer region, but you got to remember that conservation program was really launched and in conjunction with the creation of the Evers-Offer Authority and the cap on pumping and the beginning of the water market. And so you see, the effect here as, people are, really focusing more on reducing their water use, and the water market is changing the price of water in the Evers-Aquifer for the various users. Remember, before the aquifer was regulated, there was no commodity price for water in the aquifer. Essentially what you're paying for is the well and the electricity to pump that water out of the well and the equipment related to that. But saws and the other users, irrigators, were not paying any price for that water. It's not the case today. Today they pay a fee to the Evers-Offer Authority for their pumping based on the type of pumping, for municipal or irrigation, whatever it is. But so they pay a fee, and the water market allows them to trade or sell their water rights. And so, somebody who wants to come in and meet a need for their water uses, is in a situation where they have to buy or lease water if they don't have that water, or can, tap into a existing supplier from the Edwards. And so you can see that's a pretty significant difference between these two periods here over 16 years, 2.6 million acre feet of pumping less than had been projected. And so taking another look at that, this shows the total pumping from the Evers-Aquifer over time up till, 34, when we have the first, we have really accurate records, and we know recharge for the Edwards going to 2020. And you can see that pumping in the aquifer peaks here in the late 80s. And then it goes down over time. Now, Vista Ridge comes online here in 2020. And there are some minor water supplies developed in the region, but you can see that pumping from the aquifer has gone down over time. It's probably not going to continue to go down forever, but part of what's going on here is that individuals who receive permits have a incentive to use less of that water and to conserve it as much as possible, so that they can stretch their water supply or lease water they don't need, or maybe sell their water rights. In the case of the San Antonio water system, they used I think it's this year, 80, let's see, maybe 89 or 84. They used 193,000 acre feet from the Edwards in that year. And the permit they received from the Evers-Aquifer Authority was substantially less than that. I think it was around 135,000 acre feet. And so in Saw's situation, they had to go out and buy additional water rights and lease additional water rights so that they could meet a similar demand that they had faced in the past during a drought year. And so they had lots of incentives to get people to conserve and to reduce water use and to, plug and repair leaking infrastructure to stretch the water supply they had. Now, this is a really interesting chart. This shows the total water. I think it's interesting, I should say. Total water pumped and total water, traded uh, as a percentage of pumping. And so what you see here, these are the water trades by year, okay? And that includes sales and leases. It's both. And you can see the the total of water trading in acre feet. See this line here, you follow that line, and the peak year in 2015, hey, it's about 80,000, 90,000 acre feet traded in that year. And you can see the pumping here on this line. And so pumping, as I said, showed in this last slide, hey, it's been more or less trending down. Well, take a look at these features here where you see this relationship between, trading and water use. In other words, you see a relationship where the water market's more active and there are more trades because of demand, that water use goes down. In other words, water use is responding to the price signal. The price goes up because people are more actively trading, and that encourages users to use more. So some of the impacts of the water market. For both the Rio Grande and the Edwards regions, if you look at the water plans going back from 1961 to 2012, there are massive water supply projects in those plans for both of those regions. For the Rio Grande, you can think of the a 1968 plan that had the very large canal, coastal canal coming from Louisiana, and then branching off and going down along the coast and down to the Rio Grande. For the Edwards offer, you can think of a whole bunch of reservoirs like Goliad and Cibolo on the San Antonio River, Cuero 1 and Cuero 2 on the Guadalupe River, and then Clopton's Crossing and some other dams on the Guadalupe River. And those water projects were never built. And except for the scaled down version of the groundwater transfer, which is known as Vista Ridge, which at one point was in the water plan for about 117, 120,000 acre feet. It's a 50,000 acre feet water project now, or 55. And so, what's going on there? Well, if you look at the projections in these water plans, boy, they're really off in these two regions when these water markets come online. In other words, all this water that's anticipated to be needed is not needed as water use becomes more efficient and is stretched through the operation of the water market. And so I just said that. And you should note that population and GDP growth in both of these regions have been substantial. So the water demands didn't, the water demands didn't slack off in terms of like people aren't moving there or the economies aren't growing. A lot of people are moving both places, and the economies continue to grow in both places, but they are using water more efficiently in both places. And so you see in both regions this decoupling of population growth and water demand. So this is the last thing I've got from the study, kind of looking at, this is one of the things, But looking at, the barriers to surface water and groundwater markets that I identified in Texas, obviously the Rio Grande and the Edwards, they are the result of these major lawsuits, one in state, one in federal court related to the drought of record, you know, and so you have these big water crisis and, you have this litigation, that's not a consistent or, you know, probably very efficient way to create future water markets. To have to do so because we've reached a water crisis. And so I've, taken a look at what are some of the things that are holding back the creation of new water markets. Well, the first one's pretty obvious. Hey, you just don't have enough scarcity um, in certain regions to really, justify the creation of a market because there are hurdles to creating a water market and you've got to get over those hurdles. And so another one would be, hey, there's just not water really available for trading. There's so little water supply available that there's some places in the state you obviously look at and you think, that's probably not going to be a very good place to try to set up a water market. And then also another issue is the absence of either natural or man-made systems for conveyance. In other words, hey, you don't have really have a river that will allow you to transfer some water rights where they could be available in a water market to where they're really needed, or you don't have a pipeline available. And then public or political opposition within the area of origin. That's a real issue and one that has to be overcome and can be overcome, I think, with a thorough, education process and involving stakeholders, in a region where you're going to create the water market in the creation of that water market. Um, from the beginning until the market's operating and then through the oversight of that market. And then, there are there's the issue of the absence of insufficient mechanisms to address impacts of water transfers on third parties and the environment. So, you think about surface water, and when you transfer a surface water right, you got to make sure before that's going to be approved that third parties, other folks with water rights are not being significantly impacted. And so there has to be a mechanism to address those impacts. And same for the environment. There are environmental flow needs that do need to be met. And water transfers, especially surface water transfers, have to take that into account. Then there's the lack of adequate water data. And let me just say here as an aside, doing some work now in Arizona with groundwater issues. Boy, Texas has got a lot of data compared to some other states. But the more data, the easier it is to make a water market work and to manage that water market. And then fragmented water management. Um, we've got 100 groundwater districts and two subsidence districts. And for groundwater markets, you take a look at that. Many of those districts are based on single county models, and the districts might have different rules between each other. And so setting up a water market that probably will need to encompass multiple districts, is a hurdle in terms of making sure the rules are consistent between those districts so that you can trade within a significant area. So those are some of the barriers that I found that are specific to both surface and groundwater markets. I have much more specific barriers identified for surface water markets and groundwater markets in the upcoming study. So that's actually it. I don't have a big summary page. Instead, I've got how you can contact me and how you can learn more about other Texas water issues. Yes, this is my opportunity to do a free plug for the Texas Water Journal, which you can find at texaswaterjournal.org, and Texas Plus Water, which you can find at texaspluswater.wp.texasstate.edu. That's a mouthful. And then Talk Plus Water podcast that I do, and which you can find via every issue of Texas Plus Water when that comes out, or almost every issue. There's a new episode of Talk Plus Water, but you can find on Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, TuneIn, et cetera, et cetera. So that
Thank
was
you,
a lot. So I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, you're perfect timing. We've got about 7 minutes left in the hour for any questions. You can raise your hand or just speak out.
No question, just a great presentation, Todd. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, this is Robert. I've got a question and a comment. So yeah, love the presentation. I really like the definition y'all came up with. I think it's like a really nice, coherent description of kind of like, I guess, how water markets relate to Texas. I'm going to disagree with you though on your interpretation of the water markets in the Edwards Aquifer. I'm not saying I'm right. You've done more thinking on this than I have, but to me, the big thing that caused the decrease in pumping is not so much the water market, but the cap, which of course is a predecessor to having a water market.
Right.
But it's that regulatory cap that really created that divergence between those lines that you showed. Because the water market, you're right, the water market started 97, 98, but so did more serious regulation of the resource. And in fact, my hypothesis is that the water market in the Edwards has increased pumping within the context of the regulatory framework. And so whatever the rules are, and also whatever is happening with the drought, impacts how much you can pump from the aquifer. The market is pursuing efficiency, not only in encouraging efficiency of what people are using to make more available, but also the efficiency in like what is available overall to be used. And so, it's like the farmers have the ability to sever 1 acre foot per acre out of their 2 total acre foot per acre. And then depending who you believe, people say they should have only gotten 1 acre foot per acre with the original allocation. So that water is now being bought by somebody that may be using the full amount of the resource. The water is being purchased to store and aquifer storage and recovery projects. Again, kind of maximizing what's available to be used. So my thinking is like with time, the market moving, because you're not going to buy water to just let it sit there. So the people who are buying water that's unused, you're going to seek to maximize that water. So, and I don't know how you look at that. It'd be a more complicated analysis that you showed in terms of you have to be mapping out what can be pumped, given the regulatory scheme, given drought, what those percentages look like over time.
So, I look at the cap as part of the water market. And so I don't separate those two. You can't have an effective water market, as I've defined it, unless you have a cap. Because your water rights, I mean, who's going to pay for water that they can't, have a reasonable opportunity to get? And so the cap allows you much more certainty with that. And so it's a really fundamental aspect of the water market. When you look at storage, so storage is, this is a, kind of a 50,000, foot view of the study. Storage is a big component of all the stuff that I recommend in the study and look at. Didn't really talk about it, but the big component for the Edwards is the aquifer storage and recovery facility that SAWS operates. And for the Rio Grande, those water rights, which were they were prior appropriation water rights that were essentially converted to correlative rights based on storage in Falcon Reservoir and in Amistad. And so in that case, the judge entered a permanent injunction against the use of the prior appropriation rights that the users had, and the parties developed a formula for allocating the water out of storage in those reservoirs, and it treats them differently. So when I look at the use over time, for example, from the Edwards, it's clearly much less than it was. And so at the peak year, you have 542,000 acre feet with no cap on pumping, right? And no permits being issued. It's never gotten close or very close to 500,000 acre feet since the Edwards Aquifer Authority was created and the cap and the water market were put in place. And so, when you look at the allocation of groundwater that you're referring to, you can see in the discussion during the deliberations in the legislature that when the 2 acre feet per acre minimum for irrigation was put in the act, they knew that that was more than was needed. The additional allocation is what, is essentially, what, drives, that's the fuel for the market. And you see that in other places all over the world. What really drives these water markets is low value uses of irrigation rights. So lots of irrigation, mostly put towards low value uses. And so once the water markets are created, whether it's Australia or, in the case of the Rio Grande or the Edwards, you see a shift to higher value uses among the water rights users in those systems. And you see that in the Edwards. I mean, for example, initially, what happens in the Edwards is there's a lot of ag rights that are sold, to SAWs to be used for municipal rights and leases as such. And then you saw that in the Rio Grande. Initially, the municipal industrial users, they needed water, and so they were purchasing irrigation rights. And so over time, that activity slows down, and you see much more of the trading today. Most of the trading actually is between irrigation users in both the Edwards and the Rio Grande. And as a result of that, you've seen a shift of more water going to higher value agricultural commodity uses than before. It was a long-winded response to a long-winded question.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think my point is, like, for example, without the market or without a market, San Marcos wouldn't have sold excess water under its permit to Kyle this last year. With a market, they did. And if there wasn't a market, San Marcos wouldn't have used its full permit. But with the market, it increased pumping. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's, it's the kind of what I think about with the market is that, it's like you have to look at the cap, and it's a time varying cap based on the weather. And so, so to me, I wonder, are we seeing an increase maybe in percent utilization with time? I don't know how you look at that, because it's more complicated than a set cap. And the regulations changed a little bit over time too.
Right. Well, I mean, you see two things. I mean, you see the actual amount, being pumped go down. It's not going to go down forever. But the other thing is Kyle is getting that water for another Edwards user. They're not getting it from Quero 1 or Quero 2 or Goliad or Cibolo. And so that's really significant in terms of, the amount of money saved, right? And also the environmental impacts of those surface water projects that have been avoided as a result of water use being much more efficient and users being able to get water much easier than they would have before. I mean, just think about this, the issue in the Edwards was that, hey, I could buy, some guy's got a well near me, and maybe I could pay him not to pump out of his well and I could pump it instead. But that there's nothing that bars somebody else from putting in another well. And, what am I really getting at that point? Everybody's just pumping more and more. And so, the system as it is now, yeah, there may be water rights that are utilized more often. But, if you are, doing that and, you're avoiding these other costs and you're, allowing people who've got significant needs to meet those needs, with the existing amount of water that's allocated, that's, I think, a big win.
Well, it's always nice to end on a win, so why don't I say that we are wrapping up the blue bag for now. Todd has his contact information here on the screen. Please reach out to him directly, and thank you all for attending today.